Welcome to HERMAC's podcast preview of Summit 2008. Today's program features a conversation with Paralympic medal winner and executive coach Bonnie St. John, a keynote presenter at Summit 2008. Hosting today's conversation is Renata Visconta, Director of Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness at W.W. Grainger and Chair of the Summit 2008 Program Committee.
Hi, Bonnie, and thanks for taking time to be with us today.
Oh, it's great. I'm so looking forward to being with you live in Chicago.
Well, we have several questions we'd love to ask you just to introduce you and your very exciting topics to our HERMAC audience for November. Let me start with the first question. You've had many accomplishments in your career, including being the first African American to win medals in the Winter Olympics. How does a girl growing up in San Diego go on to become a competitive downhill ski racer?
It's a crazy story, isn't it? A one-legged black girl from San Diego to become an international ski racer. If you're going to do anything extraordinary, which means out of the ordinary, you have to have initiative. You have to have vision, because you have to see the world differently than other people, or otherwise, by definition, you're being ordinary. So you have to be able to go outside the ordinary. And that was something always very important to me, is having a strong personal vision, being able to see things that other people don't see, and then go after it and believe in it. I also think it's about listening to the right people, that there are all kinds of people around you, and some will tell you you can't do things. Some people will tell you to think smaller, don't think so big, that's too hard. And other people will really encourage you to raise the bar and to do the extraordinary. So as a leader, you have to consider, who are your trusted advisors? Who are you looking to for advice? Who are you surrounding yourself with? And make sure they're the kind of people who push you to do the extraordinary.
Speaking of extraordinary, in your work with business and government leaders, have you noticed any common characteristics among these highly successful, extraordinary folks?
Well, similar to what I was saying earlier, it's about taking risks. That if you're going to be extraordinary, you're going to risk being different. You're going to have to, if you're doing exactly what everyone else is doing, but more so, that's not a path to extraordinary. I was actually in Chicago a couple of days ago, and I visited Oprah and Friends Radio and was interviewed along with Bill Toomey about the Olympics. And we were both talking about, what does it take to be extraordinary? And Bill Toomey is a pentathlete whose record still stands after, I think it's 39 years. That's extraordinary. And one of the things he mentioned was going to Germany and training with the German team. That in the Olympics before he won, the Germans had taken first, third, and seventh, I think he said. And he went and asked the coach, can I go train with you in Germany? And they said yes. And he said, I learned things that I never would have learned if I had stayed in America. So he took a risk. He really stretched out. And then that same day, I had lunch with Russ Wassendorf, he's the publisher of Stock Futures and Options magazine. So it was really fun for me to have lunch with an extraordinary person. And we were talking about hard work and the importance of hard work. And I asked him, was that your secret to building the global company that you've built? He's got 23 offices in Romania, I think. And he said, he thought about it, and he said, no, he said, I was really willing to take risks that other people weren't taking. And, and I can't go into all his stories as we're talking now, but he took risks, but he took intelligent risks. He took calculated risks. He took mitigated risks. But he wasn't afraid of looking a risk in the eye and moving forward on it. It was just funny. See, I heard several times in that day, risk from extraordinary people. And so it really stuck in my mind as that's an important thing to think about, is, are you willing to take risks, and in what way, and how are you mitigating your risks? How are you calculating your risk? Are you skilled at risk? Is a question I would want to ask the leaders who are listening.
Bonnie, you've done some extraordinary things in your own life, and you've had some extraordinary roles. You've spent some time in particular as the Director of Human Capital Issues on the National Economic Council during the Clinton administration. What do you see as some of the challenges facing business leaders today, especially as it relates to human capital issues?
Well, one of the things I got to do when I was working in the White House on human capital issues was to lead an extraordinary team of people from across the administration to look at the future of the workforce. And even though I was there, a few years back, we were looking far into the future at the different pressures on the workforce. And I had economists from Harvard, I had economists from the Labor Department, from the Treasury, formerly from the Federal Reserve, amazing team of people. It was a wonderful experience. And a lot of what we ended up talking about was the long-term pressures of globalization and increasing technology on the workforce. And of course, one of the biggest impacts of that is the loss of low-skilled jobs, that we really just are not going to have as many low-skilled jobs. And looking at where that takes us, we need higher skill and we need higher performance from the people in the workforce today. And as I travel all around and visit hundreds of companies, and I see this everywhere, is that we are all under so much pressure to compete in a global economy and to provide more and more value. And each person needs to be really creating incredible value, being creative, taking risks, being innovative. If you're doing something repetitive that a machine can do, you can be replaced. And so in the human capital field, we're looking at how do we support leaders in leading teams of people that can do that can really continue to perform at higher and higher levels year in, year out. And then, we've got the added pressure of multiple generations in the workplace, the baby boom retiring. We've got these tsunamis kind of moving through as we are trying to build teams that can compete and win under very imperfect conditions. It's interesting. I think of the disabled athletes as an interesting metaphor, that so often we use sports as a metaphor for what we're doing in the business environment today, because disabled athletes are world class under very imperfect conditions. I don't have one of my legs, people may not have an arm, your sight may be impaired, but nobody is waiting around to say, well, when this is perfect, then I will do my best. You do your best with whatever you have. And in today's workforce, in today's workplaces, I think that's what's needed, is to have teams of people that can really come together and win no matter what.
Bonnie, you speak about success across many different kinds of venues, in part due to the creation of a concept called communities of champions. Can you describe what a community of champions is?
Well, this is what I'm going to be talking about in my talk, and it comes from one of my coaches, Warren Witherell, who's in his career, he coached so many champions in water skiing and in snow skiing, and it was just had such an impact in sport. And I got to see him when he was in his 70s, so sort of at the end of his career, and he said, Bonnie, one of the things I did was I never created champions one at a time. I created communities of champions because they can push each other harder than one person can push by themselves. And so I'm going to be talking about that and using examples from the White House. I worked for Bob Rubin and talking about, he was also a person who fostered a community of champions. He had to deal with so many big egos and agendas and billion-dollar budgets. And how do you bring that into a community? That was his role as the head of the National Economic Council, was really to create cooperation across huge divides. And also Ken Cragen, he's a big Hollywood promoter. He was the one who did Hands Across America and created the careers of Lionel Richie and Kenny Rogers and amazing people. And then also my coach and mentor, Warren Witherell. So those are three of the people that I'll be talking about in terms of how do you create communities of champions. And champions, a community of champions is not an easy thing. It sounds warm and fuzzy, a whole community of really talented people. Well, that's not an easy, comfortable thing. There are big egos and competing agendas. It's not an easy thing to do, and yet it's how we can compete and win in today's environment. So I'm looking forward to having that discussion with your leaders, who are some of the top leaders and people really making a difference in the field of HR.
Bonnie, Bonnie, we've been hearing so much recently about the Olympics in Beijing. Are you still involved in that effort?
I'm so excited because this year I get to be a part of the Paralympic ambassador team and helping the athletes who are preparing for the Paralympics to learn, to train them to think about themselves as U.S. representatives, to represent Olympic values, to be role models, and even to deal with the media and the political pressures they're going to face in China. So I'm very excited to continue to be part of the team.
So Bonnie, this has been really interesting. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we're really looking forward to hearing more about these topics and seeing you in November.
Great. I'm so looking forward to being there as well.
This concludes today's podcast preview of Summit 2008. Hear more from Bonnie and other thought leaders on Wednesday, November 5th. For registration information, visit us online at hermac.org.